name's Glyn Pooley, and I'd like to talk about art. This time, my subject is
the depiction of peace through art. So we're going back quite a while with this image. As you can see, 4th century, but it is an image of Noah, and those that can remember, Noah built an ark because there was this great flood. Apparently, they haven't found any kind of definitive evidence for it, but there are lots of ancient myths that kind of it's got into people's consciousness. But while he was on this ark, he needed something to indicate hope. So he sent out this dove to fly and find a piece of land, and this dove came back with this twig in his mouth, this olive branch, and hence it became part of a symbol. This lone bird and this olive branch as well. Also in this image, which as I say is catacombs, which is down underneath Rome, where the old Christians would hide because they didn't want to be eaten by lions, amongst other things. They painted this image in this natural pigment. As you can see, this beautiful red ochres. But it also engages with another symbol as well, because we'll be looking at a whole host of symbols that relate to peace tonight, amongst other things. With this figure, with his arms out, it is something which has been engaged with on the Christian tradition, but not just Christian, right throughout all the other world religions as well. You think of this figure, this cross-like figure, once the arms go out and the figure is standing vertical, we all have an understanding of what that can kind of mean. So we'll see that in a number of different interpretations as well. But we're seeing people here marking an ancient story of hope, and maybe they were in a difficult situation. They're putting it on their wall to remind them of that. And peace is nothing but, if it's nothing, it is definitely a mark of hope. So we mentioned the Christian kind of ideology there. Let's go back even further to a footprint of the Buddha. This is in India, Gandhara. Buddha 2,600 years ago, approximately, and different philosophy altogether. This philosophy with Buddhism, in this case, is about emptiness. Okay, there's a presence. This is the footprint that has transcended this earthly plane and released themselves from the suffering that can be here on this plane and reached a level of nirvana in this case. So you got this oversized foot sculpture marked with this wheel in the center. Now this is a wheel that is key to Buddhist teaching, which marks out the symbol of, it indicates towards the Noble Eightfold Path, which is a set of teachings that the Buddha left. It also marks the cycle of life, of course, and the transcendence of awareness of life cycles, and then its transcendence. And then below you got these 3 cups, or partly circular, which are the 3 main jewels of Buddhism as well, which are the Buddha himself, the Dharma, which is the teaching, and the Sangha, which is the community. And these 3 elements come together to help in this path towards enlightenment. The circle above the Dharma chakra, as well as known as, is also a meditative kind of focus, which enables the participant to engage in all this understanding and aspect of the interconnectedness of these 3 levels. So we're looking at a large foot, which is empty. We got this circle, which is a wheel, and we got these 3 these three symbols at the bottom. So the theme of three is very important as well. That kind of can be used in an understanding and an indication towards symbols of peace. And one of the, in the West now, symbols that most people kind of automatically go to when they reflect on peace is this Buddha's head you see on the right hand side there. Now, the Buddha head in this case is a Buddha kind of in contemplation. The name Buddha means awakened one or an enlightened being. And the one on the left, which is an image that is painted on what they call tankas, which are personal meditation charts, is the Buddha of compassion. So we're seeing a very contemplative Buddha head with its shape and its form. It's a definite shape, it's a definite form. You notice that it's a soft flowing head and it has some beautiful curves in it, which indicate towards a very gentle, in this case, smiling mouth. That's the kind of image that people in the West have really been drawn to, maybe within the last 50 years, particularly. And you see them popping up in their gardens. You just walk around any garden centre and there'll be a Buddha, stone Buddha. You might have one yourself. Now, I've mentioned gardens because that's going to come into the presentation in a minute, because these are, they're linked up. Okay. The image on the left-hand side, as I said, the Buddha of compassion in this heavenly realm is sat on this lotus flower. So we're starting to put certain connections together with certain flowers with certain portrayals of the human figure. And the combination of them and the accumulation of them leads to a sense of peace and well-being as we move through this. The one on the right, stone one, is monochrome in this case, although some, as you'll see, will be decorated as well. The tankas generally on the left are really quite colourful, but you'll see they have got certain prominent colours, again linked into this idea of what is transcendent and taking us in this direction. The colour blue will appear on a number of occasions, as you can see it does there, as does the colour green. And in this case, we have the golden Buddha, which is a manifestation of the golden light of the sun. But we see certain repeating colours as well, because we're trying to look for themes and inspiration for our own artworks and trying to work out what kind of universal language is being used here. It's good to note these different elements. Just looking at this image, I don't know about you, it gave me a kind of sense of peace, a sense of reflection. As you can see, the eyes of this head are just partly open, just the tiniest bit open. And any of you that may have done meditation know that if you're practicing meditation, when you start to meditate, if you can, they say, sit on the floor, maybe on a cushion, maybe cross-legged. Try and empty your mind of thoughts, they say. Practically impossible, And they say, this is the practitioner leader maybe, just close your eyes, but not totally. Just focus a few yards in front of you. So that focus keeps you awake. And if you meditate for a while and everything around you starts to become still and silent, you could start to start to nod off. So by that focused perspective, we stay awake. I talked about this kind of gentle flow of the figure in this. It's a very definite look, isn't it? With those curvilinear eyebrows, the curvilinear nature of the eyes partly shut, and the curves of the lips as well. In the center as well, you've got this, what we would call in the Indian tradition, the bindi. This is the central focus for our spiritual chakra. Okay, so this is indicating being deeply present. Above that, you can just about make out a flower as well, which could be linked to the chakras. In this case, the upper contemplative chakras. All those things are coalescing to give us this sense of peace. Scale is important as well. We think of generally our little Buddhas in our gardens being tiny little things, or on our mantelpiece. Some people put Buddhas on their mantelpiece or on a table. Of course, when you get over to India and other places in the East, whether that be, Tibet or Sikkim in this case, or Bhutan, they can gravitate to a grand scale. Now, this grand scale creates a sense of awe, almost, or overwhelming presence of peace. I don't know if any of you visited Malaga in Spain, but there's a very big Buddhist center just outside that with a very large Buddha, a plain Buddha, but beautiful Buddha. This also shows how important to some cultures this nature of peace is. We sometimes are challenged with that nature of peace on this island, as we know, but in some of these cultures, not only has it been around a long time, and not only these statues are very prominent, not to say they don't have their issues with struggles and wars, etc., in these other countries, but there is a real primary root that runs through their communities that has enabled them to build such things and for them to be maintained and sustained. So when you're in the presence of something like this, you're picking up a collective focus around you of all those that are visiting that place, all those that have visited it, and all those minds are focusing on what we would call Buddha nature. And this Buddha nature is rooted in a sense of, or a path to peace that takes us to a sense of enlightenment. Again, in this picture, on this scale, you can see that this Buddha has got certain qualities. The face, a little curvilinear in this case, is a little bit more stern, okay, because there's many aspects to the Buddha, but the colors are not dissimilar. There's a high emphasis on the color blue, and the Buddha itself is a golden color as well. All to generate this uplift and potential balance with stillness. These are the kind of language that they're moving towards. It's also sat in a very beautiful place, as you can see, on the green land, and the blue is in the background supporting it. Of course, that would be the greenery of the forest, but the light is kind of working in such a way that the whole thing all coalesces. So scale, in this case, is important. That these gardens have, which, again, generate these peaceful thoughts and peaceful minds. The Zen culture is one rooted in Japan's ancient culture and religion known as Shinto, which is a deep appreciation for nature. They believe all aspects of nature, whether it be a rock or a tree or a waterfall, has what they call a kami, which is a spirit. And our relationship with that spirit is very important. If we go to those spirits in the sense of openness and peace, we receive those elements. Okay. What we've got in a garden like this, careful arrangement of symbols. We've got a garden that has been gently walled off. Okay, so it's a walled off space, hence focus and contemplation. Beyond that, we see nature. In the top left-hand corner, we see some cherry blossoms. That comes up a number of times as well. But the focus on the garden itself are the rocks and the moss. Okay, now these are male and female elements. Okay? Something else will come up to balance the yin and the yang. We've also got this beautifully raked gravel area surrounding it, which has been done lovingly by the gardener, maybe a Zen monk in this case, to suggest the gentle energy flows around those islands of moss and rock. Okay? They tend it with great care, and they move the pebbles, stones around in a gentle way to accumulate this sense of peace while they're actually moving the earth and moving the stones around. The accumulation of these different elements and the balance between the rocks and the moss then create a sense of space. Now, space, the created space, is another thing which is very important in Japanese culture in relation to these, Zen culture, and they call it ma, M-A. Some of you might have tried to do ikebana or flower arranging. Now, flower arranging in this tradition is about the wonderful spatial relationships between the flower. It's that element which can't be seen, but when we're open and sensitive, it's the element which creates the most impact, because we can take all of ourselves to an empty space. It's a spiritual focus. So here, these relationship between these rocks and these moss are creating this sense of space. So when we go to a place like this, we have an opportunity to be around that sense of space, and it triggers in us, or maybe opens in us, the opportunity to let go into it, because it is all about us having the opportunity to let go. An example of that is, for example, when you go out into nature and you're surrounded by trees, and then you come across maybe a man-made object, and the difference is quite astounding. If you look around, the edges of the man-made object often are quite sharp, quite clearly defined, and nature is all about softness, rejuvenation, and flow. Okay? So in this case, where they're creating this relationship which opens up the space, us, or we all being nature, of course, can step into it. And that gives us the opportunity to breathe freely, be at one with that space. So again, thinking about peace and art and peace, space is another aspect which is very important. The creation of space. I often talk about the creation of space in our paintings. We often fill them up far too much, far too busy, not enough opportunity for us to release into them. We'll see some of the greater paintings, which we'll look at in a second. Wonderful balance of space. Here, just looking at this on the screen gives us a sense of kind of a gentleness and peace. This art form of the garden on this scale is phenomenal. We're talking about the relationship of Ma, the relationship of the spaces between the plants, in this case, the subtle building, the water, the colours that we talked about, the scale. Each tree, in this case, has got its own scale and its relationship to the other trees, which are carefully gardened, carefully observed, and carefully managed. The pagoda in the center, of course, again, is this golden pagoda, not unlike the golden Buddhas, okay? And we're surrounded by the greens and the blues. We're also surrounded by a very still water, okay? That was the equivalent in the Zen garden of the gravel. And that still water is reflecting the sky. So another sense of space, another sense of the enormity of the presence. When we step into a place like this, again, it gives us a chance to open up, to become still, and to connect on another level. It finds out into this beautiful flower with this beautiful golden center again. Yeah? So this is all about the process towards peace and the process towards enlightenment. We're going to see later a kind of great Western artist using it in some of his later paintings, using this kind of iconography. And that's the work of Claude Monet when he created his large garden paintings. So again, we're trying to piece together this universal language that we can use to indicate peace. Richness and the quality of unifying these different elements that we're talking about and their deep value. I know a number of you are gardeners and you experience, no doubt, this beautiful sense of connection when you're gardening. It's an opportunity to let thoughts go often, and you're so absorbed in just tending that plant. After, you might be tired, but also uplifted, also feeling a kind of deeper connection with being a human being, and maybe a sense of stillness and gratitude which comes from that. So this gives an idea of the importance of these elements and the importance of us being able to put them into our artworks as well, and getting some understanding of why we're making the artworks we're making and the impact they can have on other people, the viewing audience, if we mindfully produce the work. So we're seeing not just beautiful plants here, which have tremendous benefits for us on so many levels. We're seeing their wonderful arrangement and how they complement each other and the environment that they can create, which is peace, well-being, uplifting. Yes. It's something which has evolved over millions of years. Our engagement with nature, our engagement with its values, is something which is incredibly deep. I know in more recent times it's become more and more pressured for us in the West, but there's still something deeply resonant with it for us. So in this beautiful garden where the emphasis is on the moss and the trees and the water in the background, all those things are accumulating to give us this wonderful sense of well-being. Okay. So let's look at 2D art. Well, I say 2D, but it's actually a screen. Okay. In this often cases of ink. Okay. And these screens are read from right to left, as opposed to us reading them left to right. So the seasons would start on the spring on the right and then move through summer, autumn, winter. The nature of these screens, and there was a large number of them were created around the idea of nature, seasons passing, etc. They kind of link up to the transience of our own existence. that is a prominent ideology of the Eastern traditions. We all know that our life is relatively short and it goes through phases and it goes through cycles. But these artists kind of acknowledge that and celebrate it as well. So by having a number of images of time passing on all presented on one large artwork, it gives us an opportunity to step into another deeper realization of our life and our past and our present and our future and the cyclical quality of our existence. And it's that cyclical quality which is something which is prominent in the Eastern traditions. It's enriching if we can incorporate elements of those in our artwork sometimes. I know from, often when we make an artwork, we might choose a scene that appeals to us, and then we set off and we paint it. And it's a particular moment that's captured. Sometimes it might be a nice idea to maybe capture that scene or a number of scenes at a different time, different seasons of the year or in different stages of development. In the past, we've looked at the work of people like Monet that chose a simple icon like a haystack, and he studied the light on them at different times of day, and he also studied the seasons in which they were being portrayed. So it's something that we can tap into to engage with a deeper understanding and richness of our experience and our relationship with the world. When we do that, we open up a sense of connection again for the viewer, which will release in them a sense of peace and a sense of understanding. Okay? And when it comes to peace, okay? Some of that might sound obvious, but it's not something which we consider enough. We need a certain level of harmony in our paintings to enable them for the viewer to be able to engage with them as deeply as we'd like them to be able to. So the next one we've got is the tree. Now, a tree as a symbol of peace is another universal symbol. In Buddhism, the Buddha achieved enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, which was a fig tree in northeast India. Here you got the symbol of the tree and its branches, but we've also got the root showing as well in this circle. So it's important to see or be aware often of the unseen. Now, when we look at a tree, we see the trunk, we see the branches, we often forget about the fact that a large part of that tree is under the ground, it's unseen. It's the roots which are really important, often to the thriving and the survival of that tree. So again, for us, we have to understand what's at the root of something when we're making a painting, and how can we share that root clearly enough so that they appreciate the beauty in the branches. So, symbol of tree as well is we appreciate how much trees, is more recent times now, how much they give us, not just the oxygen and shade and everything else. Most of our accommodations built out of one, etc. There's many things that trees give us. They're wonderful beauty, but they also give us, when we engage with them, the opportunity to reflect on how they generate themselves in the world. They grow so slowly, most of them, that we hardly notice, but they stay with that growth for some hundreds of years and some into the thousands. It's a different pace. It's a different pace. Now, when we're talking about peace, we often start to think about slowing down, to have a different pace, to be a different pace, to be in this meditative state. So we're offering indicators which take us there. So if we move on to the right there, then we're into the interconnected nature of everything. Everything is interconnected. Everything is interdependent. This path that we're all on, believe it or not, we need every single person that we've ever met, that is ever in the world. And they all have a part to play, as does every other aspect of nature, etc., etc. The more we contemplate peace, the more we understand that quality. In our artwork, we see that if our painting, for example, is not quite finishing, it's not quite going well, and we change one little bit of it, all of a sudden, it means we got to change 2 or 3 things on the other side of the painting. That's just an indicator of how interconnected every single aspect of our painting is. And our painting is an analogy for the microcosm of the whole universe. Okay? So everything is interconnected. We attain this interconnection when we get out of the way often, when we don't overthink things, when we let things flow through us. Okay? And the times where things flow through us the most efficiently is when we are at peace, when our mind is fundamentally open to the universe, open to the to the spaces between things, open to the quality of the Zen garden, etc. And then if we move on to the next symbol, we have these 2 fishes swimming in this circle. This is a symbol of freedom for the Buddhist tradition. Fish, not like any other animal, including ourselves, can swim 360 degrees wherever they want. They can swim up, down, to the side, or the left. We pretty much got gravity to contend with. So it's a great symbol of freedom. I'll quickly run through the bottom 4. On the left-hand side, we've got this wheel with 4 arms to it. That's the Dharma chakra. That indicates something called the Noble Eightfold Path, which is primary teaching, the Dharma of the Buddha, and it's concerned with wisdom, livelihood, and awareness and compassion. If you're interested, maybe look up that in a little bit more detail. But it is about balance, it's about understanding, and it's about the right kind of thinking to enable us to move towards a sense of enlightenment. And then we'll move on to the lotus flower, which we discussed, the heart chakra, which is a balance in this case of these 2 squares just turned between one, just turned at right angles, so then it creates 8 points again. So square, incredibly stable, is just turned 45 degrees to complement that stability, because we do operate in movements in our existence. Everything is in a constant state of change. But if we can take ourselves through that change with a sense of stability in our mind and peace, the change is much more manageable. And then as we move across to the eternal link on the right-hand side, again, that's about the flow of life and the linked quality of life. It's not dissimilar, as most of you probably notice, of Celtic artwork as well. So the Celts were a group which came up in Central Europe. Almost their times were passing when the Buddhists were talking about their theology over in the East, and not just the Buddhists, the Hindus, etc., which became Hinduism, which was one of the roots of Buddhism, is 5,000 or 6,000 years ago old, again in the East as well. So these thoughts were going on almost simultaneously in different parts of the world, of this universal language, which we can tap into suggest peace. This Zen artwork is deceptively simple. If any of you've tried it, but to engage with it is very beautiful. It's usually monochrome, as you can see here, and this is the universal indication of space within that circle, but it's imperfect space. You can see the edges of the circle, the way they've been presented there. The practitioner has to get into a real sense of connection with everything and emptying of their mind to make artworks like this. It's done in a matter of seconds, but it might take quite a while to get to that state of meditation. This suggests emptiness, doesn't it, on many levels? On the left-hand side, you have the writing, Japanese writing, which just talks about the author as well, and infinite space. Chinese and Japanese writing, particularly, are pictograms. And this is an example here. This is the pictogram for the word peace. And if we look at it, we see the fundamental markers of balance, protection, two sides of a particular experience. So the mark on the bottom, that mark in the center, of course, could be a tree, or have all those qualities. It could be a stood up human being. We looked at that image in the catacombs with the arms outstretched. This is the balance, this is the counteraction for that vertical. At the top, we've got this line across the top, which in Eastern traditions indicates a shelter. So shelter or protection or safety, all elements which are important for the nature of peace. And then we've got two marks either side to balance out. More transience, but balanced transience. So if you look at Chinese script, a number of their words, a lot of their words can be clearly understood by the nature of the image that is being portrayed. So the art of concentration down to something which is as deceptively simple as this to create your artwork is very, very effective because it's tapping into this universal language that we're talking about. Again, this would have been painted swiftly, but with great intention, great meditative concentration. And then we've got the wonderful cherry blossoms. Yokoi, as they called Prince, the floating markets of Tokyo. That's where they were created and sold. We've got the cherry blossom because it's an iconic flower of the transience of life. People travel from all over the world, don't they, to go and see these in Japan. And they even track them down through the country from the north to the south because they come into blossom slightly later during that particular week or so that they're fleetingly there. They burst into abundance and incredible beauty, and then they're gone fleetingly. So they're a great metaphor for our existence, of course. In this one, we have the beautiful color blue behind, which is another universal color for the infinite transcendent. We link it with the sky. We link it with big thinking. We got beauty within big thinking here. We got a wonderful image of the delicate quality of the flower, all elements which coalesce to create a sense of stillness and transcendent peace. So I thought, because we looked at a lot of Eastern images, let's have a look at a few Western ones. Some of you might have been lucky enough to see this picture. It's actually in the National Gallery up in London, but I think when it was purchased, it was quite expensive, 30 plus million. In 2000, and I think it was 4, for the National Gallery, they put the painting on a tour, and it actually came to Cardiff Museum. Some of you might have even seen it there. And when you're in front of it, it's got a tremendous beauty to it, a tremendous balance to it, and a tremendous space is created within it. It's quite a small painting because it was seen as possibly being used as a meditative piece that could be transported. But it's using certain iconography. We've got the iconography of purity here. We've got the iconography of transcendent spiritual awareness, hence the pinks. Dianthus is the ancient Greek word, which is the flower of the gods, flower of divinity, being passed between mother and child in this case. The idea of this purity use of the Virgin Mother, of course, has transcended Western spirituality. The purity of the baby relating to that just gives us a sense on a number of levels of love, kindness, compassion, but also the way this picture is put together, when you're in front of it, it gives us a sense of deep stillness because all the elements are coalescing again. The colours are not dissimilar to what we've seen in the Eastern Buddhas, are they? There's green, there's blue, there's that subtle gold. But the relationship between all these pieces, what gives it that sense of wonderment and beauty. In terms of, because I've noticed the time there, I'll move swiftly on. We've got this other beautiful picture, which is in the National Gallery up in London. And again, this is talking about reflection, peaceful contemplation, deep absorption in the moment, and a simple joy of just being alive in the biggest sense of the word, where we can appreciate what it is to be part of something so vast. The iconography of this beautiful reflective painting, surrounded with the wonderful blues, that transcendent blues, the wonderful pinks, and the purity of the white, which is again another iconic symbol of peace. When people surrender, they wave the white flag. They want peace, for example. But purity is a symbol of peace. This figure is guiding our eyes down to this sense of release into this space of deep contemplation and peace. And anyone that's, again, spent time in front of these images like this, which you could see as an icon image, over time, lose your sense of self and gain a sense of vastness. And that's at the root of peace. A couple of slides ago, we looked at the cherry blossom, beautiful prints. This is another beautiful print. And a number of these prints were made in the 17th and 18th century. This is a 20th century print. But it gives us an idea of the scale of this wonderful Buddha that Westerners, particularly, in the 20th century, they didn't have an opportunity to travel, saying that Japan was closed to the West for 200 years as well. They couldn't believe their eyes when they see something like this. It is got this overwhelming sense of presence. And we talked about that when we saw the earlier statue in Sikkim. Again, connected to that wonderful tree and to the colours that we've talked about, and to that sense of reflective awe that something of this scale would be created and something in this scale would be engaged with and offered as a sense of opportunity to engage with what it is at the core of our existence. all these things are being offered in an image like this. And that would have appealed incredibly to Europeans whose life had pretty much, to some degree, particularly, this was, I think it was in the 50s, 40s, 50s, after the Second World War, would have been totally traumatized and turned on its head. So the need for peace was just absolutely overwhelming. So to see prints like this, where this was at the core of the center of a particular culture, might have been on one level incredibly optimistic, but also would have had a profound effect. I've quickly put in this totem pole because I just wanted to mention the fact that a number of ancient civilizations, of course, were deeply focused on peace. Now, the totem pole per se is not really a spiritual iconic artifact or living artifact for peace, but it engages with the multi-dimensional nature needed to achieve peace. So these totem poles are documents of a community life of a particular tribe. They engage with the natural world, as we know, from, in this case, eagles to bears and all that, etc., and the spirit of all those animals. They talk about the ancestry of a particular tribe or environment, but when the native people had their peace powwows, as they called them, or get-togethers, they were often around these totem poles. So they were showing the tribe, the visiting tribe, what they stood for, what they were about. So this opened up an engagement, clear engagement of how to communicate with each other, with the different tribes, because they had information, deep information of what they were valuing, what their ancestors were bringing to the conversation, so they could have a deeper conversation. And by having a deeper conversation and being honest and open, because it was all there in the artifact object, so they could read it. It wasn't trying to double read what someone was saying. It was presented and considered. That all those things open an avenue for peace to be achieved, because peace can only be engaged with from the position of sustained trust over a period of time and honesty. So clarity and honesty is at the basis of peace, of course. So these people were showing this. This is what their particular tribe is about. They would meet up with this other tribe. Now we can have a deep conversation about where we go from here. So that hence the totem poles on, but also their sand painting, because this is a celebration of the transience. These wonderful sand paintings would be made over a period of time. Some were quite large. They were also, again, a sand painting was also something that the Tibetans did as well, their mandalas. And then they would just pull them into a jar. Once they finish them, rub them out, and just throw them in a lake or the sea or the spirit of. But you can see with this imagery, it's all about the things that we were talking about in terms of unity of the circles and the balances of the north, east, south, and west, etc. All unifying elements which lend towards this peace. Even the symbols in the center, with this triangle paintings downwards and these two horizontal marks to the left and to the right, they indicate a humanness to it. It almost reads as a kind of face with a flower around the outside. It almost becomes a snowflake, which then's got radiating lines around it, which becomes the sun. So opposites, okay, all kind of engaging on this in this visual imagery, but then made out of a very transient material, which was just going to be after the experience of being present with the group that they were showing it to. It just gets moved around and put to one side, thrown into nature, back to nature again. So it's about impermanence as well. So these native people, they were well aware of all these processes that we're talking about deeply. And somewhere along the way, they've got lost. Okay, so It's up for us again to kind of be aware of them and re-engage with them deeply enough to make them meaningful. So I mentioned the water lily, these water lily paintings when we saw the earlier slides. Monet created, as you know, a whole garden for the latter years of his life. Many of you might have been there, Giovanni. You can see the Japanese influences in it, of course. You can see the tremendous balances. You can see the reflections in the water, the stillness. You can see the beauty of the plants. All these things, all these iconic ideas that we've been talking about during this presentation are coalescing in his garden. And he's manifesting it in these paintings. So these loosely painted late paintings that when you walk up to them almost look like abstract marks. I've got the essence of peace in all those marks. Some of these paintings as well, are very big. They're in the Orangery in Paris, for example, and you just wrap around you. This is to engage with the bigness of peace. This is to engage with the beauty of peace and how nature and gardening and peace and certain colours and certain flowers, whether it be the lotus or the water lily, are symbols of all this. Monet was aware of this towards the end of his life, of course, and hence these paintings have become iconic through Western art. And there's many a poster on many a room around Europe that have got water lilies on them, where, there's something about this universal beauty of it, what it's indicating towards us. They're beautiful flowers. They're floating ethereally on this flat water, which is semi-transparent, which is in a constant state of change because it's reflecting the trees and the clouds around it. And there's something deep in us that we connect with there. Gazing deeply into one of these pictures again creates this sense of space and tranquility that we've been finding as a thread through this presentation. Timeline-wise, Monet was making his water lilies 1910 to 1920, So Picasso here, this is an early Picasso, painting this 1901. It shows you the root of his piece qualities. Now, we know Picasso, it was multifaceted, put it politely, in terms of very passionate person, lots of levels to him. But in his early paintings, you can see he's engaged with iconography of peace, particularly in this blue period where he was informed by sad incident of his sister dying. So this sense of melancholy and trying to overcome that was coming out in his paintings by not just the color blue being used in a certain way, but using the iconography here of the dove, or could be a white pigeon. But we'll mention that in a second. But it's a delicate creature being held to the heart of this child. So there's a definite, beautiful intimacy between nature and the innocent child in a painting like this. Something about innocence, a sense of presence of innocence and honesty awakens us a sense of peace as well. Because there's no side to it. There's something clear about it. And that creates a sense of a wellness and uplift. Now, this is an iconic image, which in Western art became reinforced this idea of the dove being an emblem of peace. We saw it in biblical pictures and iconic pictures as the spirit descending onto a figure, a dove coming down, representing the Holy Spirit. But in an image like this was taken up after the Second World War by the International Peace Conference. They thought it was a dove. It was But actually, Picasso, when he painted it, he said it was a white pigeon. But he was happy to let people misconstrue that it was a dove because it became so famous. Mm. But then he painted a number of images which were doves of peace. So you can see these images are referring back to Zen art, that early period of Zen art, where everything's been pared down to one color and space. So that space between the lines becomes incredibly important in images like this. That clear, focused intention of the artist. As we know, Picasso was an incredible draftsperson, so his hand was very, very definite. And that enabled him to create something which was iconic without hesitation, once seen, remembered. So sometimes our paintings can just be far too complicated, and sometimes we just need to pare them right back to the essentials, particularly if we're involved with this peace relationship. Peace is not, as we know, not just the absence of noise. It is something deep within us. And this is an image, these images give us an indication towards that, because the actual defined space, the dark mark, is relatively minimal compared to the vastness of in this case, the parchment or the paper, which indicates and pushes us, gently nudges us towards the indication of peace within that picture. Another artist that we used still life that was fascinated by the nature of peace, of course, was Giorgio Morandi. He would work on his pictures for months. They're very relatively simple shapes and forms, but they evoke a tremendous sense of contemplation and peace. He let the dust settle all over his studio because he didn't move things around. So there was this idea of this lack of movement, but there was also deep reflection. And it's the relationship between the objects in this case, which creates this wonderful balance. But we're seeing it surrounded by large areas of space again. It's that combination always that gives artworks real longevity, because they can be reflected on for long periods of time. His work is deceptively simple if you tried to do it, but it's a wonderful indication of how we don't have to be as sophisticated as we think we have to be sometimes. We don't have to paint great monuments and fill our pictures with lots of grand buildings and vast landscapes. We can create beautiful artwork with just a few bottles and pieces of cardboard and rock that is formed into certain arrangements. If we have the intention there, the clear intention behind our artwork to want to offer this nature of deep understanding and peace. So Georgia O'Keeffe in this painting, of course, we did look at this, it indicates peace. This reflection on this mountain pass with its wonderful mists were something that she needed to paint at this particular time in her life. This was painted at Lake George, just north of New York. There's a great national park there. I think it's 6 million acres or something. She was married to Stieglitz, the photographer. Very turbulent relationship. And she needed to get away from all that. So she painted these images. She also, we did just talk about her a while ago, she then moved to the desert regions of America for a wonderful sense of peace and space. So in this image, we have this beautiful blue, these wonderful mists, this simple image, which is reflections, but offers a sense of contemplation for us to reflect on the vastness of our experience. We also looked at the work of Agnes Pelton, another 20th century painter that was involved with this sense of the spiritual development to a sense of uplift that can take us to a place of peace. She's got a wonderful image of this lotus bud in this translucent vase, which is then pointing up towards the star of Venus, brightest star in the sky, star of love and understanding, in this wonderful sky. Vast, warm indications of mountainous regions at the lower part of the picture. All things which give us an opportunity to open up our heart and let go of busyness, of thought in this context. It's the letting go of the busyness and the thinking of the large, big thinking, which enables peace to surround us and become into us. So we've got these wonderful combinations here at the base, the mistiness around those mountains, softness, ethereal quality, wonderful sunset, vastness of the sky, all things which give us those kinds of corporations. And in this picture, vastness is there again until we come to this central light. Light is a tremendous, iconic quality of peace. It appears over and over and over again in artworks. Just painting itself is a manipulation of light. We have to mix colors. All the colors come out. When they all coalesce, they come out of the white light. To see that white light, we have to go through all the dark lights as well, which we put in our pictures. But it gives us a tremendous focus. The Buddhist quality that we talked about, enlightenment, again, focusing on this sense of light and light manipulation. So light manipulation within space and arrangement and composition indicates a sense of peace. So in the abstract form that she's using here, we get those indicators. We get opportunities to connect with those elements within our vast being self. So I just put a couple of images at the end because some of those images, wonderful though they are, they could be slightly overwhelming. I don't expect any of you by next week to go out and build a 50-foot Buddha by any means, but we can connect on some level with this idea. So this is just a contemporary image using the iconography of the Buddha head, sense of the transparency in this beautiful indication of what could be a sunset, or it could be just water reflected in sunset. Then we've got an image which is contemporary image, which is in the Byzantine tradition, which is 3rd century to 15th, 16th century, Eastern Turkey, etc. But combining it with a certain Christian tradition, with that sense of that cross in the background, which is like Celtic cross as well, because Celtic cross is within the circle. And with this Buddha figure holding up this dish, this bowl, a receptacle at the center of his, where his belly button would be, which is in Buddhism terms, the center of the universe as well, to receive the enlightenment. So this is a cross-culture kind of image that we can combine. And another simple image using the iconography that we've just looked at, the iconography of the dove, the iconography of that circle, with the one-pointed circle, abstract shape form in the golden form, backed by space, the blueness, the composition, that makes the whole thing very manageable, but still indicating the essence of what peace is. And then I thought I'd finish with this beautiful garden, contemporary Zen garden that is would be absolutely wonderful to be in and around and experience. It's the attention to detail of all the manicuring, of all those different elements coming together, and the indication of the stepping stones to a journey towards the light in the top part of the painting is just totally uplifting.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.